All right, good morning. Good to see everybody this morning. Make your way, if you would, to Nehemiah. That's where we're gonna start this morning. We just a couple of weeks back finished the book of Ezra. Ezra and Nehemiah originally, it seems, were one, and now just due to length, they've been separated out for us. So I wanted to, as we're making our way there, I want to talk a little bit about the things that are coming up here fairly soon. Next week, Stephen and Karen Ashcraft will take the time here to talk about the mission work going on, what they're doing over in Africa. We'll be here for that. We'll be back the next week and continue working through Nehemiah, and in just a few weeks. We're going to make a change, and Corey's going to come and teach this class, and I'm going to go teach his for a matter of about 6 weeks or so. He's got some things that he's going to cover for in here, this is really good news for you guys, because right. Come on, right? You get a break from me. He's not telling his class because we want them to still be there when I get there, right? So, but anyway, we're going to make that swap, and then we'll come back and start something else. So we plan to get through Nehemiah, which I know there's a lot of material in Nehemiah, but it breaks out in pretty large sections. So that's kind of how we're going to cover it. So this morning we'll be looking at the first 2 chapters of Nehemiah, and I just want to start. Let's just start by reading. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah. Now it happened in the month of Chislev in the 20th year, as I was in Susa, the citadel, that Hananiah, one of my brothers, came with certain men from Judah. And I asked them concerning the Jews who escaped, who had survived the exile, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, the remnant there is in the province, who had survived the exile, is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire. As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days. And I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. And I said, O Lord, God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant, that I now pray before you day and night for the people of Israel, your servants, confessing the sins of the people of Israel, which we have sinned against you. Even I and my father's house have sinned. We have acted very corruptly against you, and have not kept the commandments, the statutes, and the rules that you commanded your servant Moses. Remember the word that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you're unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples, but if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though your outcasts are in the uttermost parts of heaven, from there I will gather them and bring them to the place that I have chosen to make my name dwell there. They are your servants and your people, whom you have redeemed by your great power and your strong hand. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and the prayer of your servants who delight to fear your name, and give success to your servant today, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. Now I was cupbearer to the king. So there's a little bit of backwards there. The introduction to who Nehemiah is, well, the cupbearer of the king. It's a very serious position. Persian kings, or really kings of any kind, always seem to be under threat of some sort. Right? This is how things are done. It's not, well, we're going to, started this week here, we're going to have an election, right? And we're going to see who gets to rule. No, we're going to kill the guy that's in charge and take over. That's kind of how this works. And so they're always kind of on guard against that. And as cupbearer for the king, the responsibility of safety comes into play, of protection from poison, and would occasionally be asked to check. And this is not taking it to the lab somewhere. This is drinking it and see if it kills you. If it doesn't, then I'll try it, right? So it says something about the character of Nehemiah to have this position. You don't have somebody that really in whose hands you put your life unless they are somebody that is somewhat trustworthy, right? This is not just we're just picking somebody off the street here. The Jews in exile that are in Babylon and then now Persia because of the regime change do seem to rise to various levels, higher levels in some places. We think of the book of Esther and we think of Mordecai, who has some sort of standing. And we see Nehemiah here. These are people who have taken the direction given to them by Jeremiah, by God through Jeremiah seriously, to seek the welfare of the city where you are, because there's where you'll find your welfare as well for these 70 years. So this is who he is, but he's still very, very attuned to being one of the people of God. As he hears from his brother about the condition of Jerusalem and about the people who are there, the walls are broken down, burned, right? So it's a mess. It's a big thing, right? It's a big thing. It's not just a cosmetic thing. This is a big thing to not have walls for the city. Especially as we've seen through Ezra, you have opposition to the Jews' return. This needs to be some sort of a place of safety as well. And so this needs to be done. Nehemiah's prayer. This is reminiscent of several others that we hear throughout Scripture. It takes up some very, very similar things that we hear in this, that we hear in other places. A couple of weeks back, we thought about the prayer of Ezra, as he realizes the sin that's around him, and his is kind of a different than Nehemiah's. Ezra seems to be like a sermon couched in a prayer, okay? He is before the house of the Lord and the people are around there, and so he falls face first and he makes and says this prayer. And you can imagine those listening in can hear the problems that he's bringing to God. This is what they've done, and this is what they're continuing to do, and they're standing right there going, well, yep, we can't get out of that one, right? That's exactly what we've done. Nehemiah's is not. Nehemiah's is more of a private one, but it still contains some of those same principles. A remembering of who God is, who it is that he's addressing, and the confession of their sins. The great God who keeps covenant and shows steadfast love, and this is how we've repaid you. And we've not done what we should have. And again, as in the case of Ezra, he identifies right along with those people. Even I and my Father's house have done this. We're all guilty of this. And you have done right. Okay, these books, a lot of these, as they're read, remind the Jews of why they are where they are. Okay? We try to imagine being just rank and file Jews, right? In the land that God has given them, in Canaan. Maybe in and around Judah and around Jerusalem. And life seems to be just going along the way that we think it ought to, and all of a sudden, right? All of a sudden, we're threatened, and all of a sudden, we're not home anymore. That the Babylonians have come and taken us. And we go, why'd this happen? How'd we get here? It may not register to some right away. I think that's fair to say. And what these books, as they read these again, in exile and after exile, is of kind of a defense of what God's done here. And the question may very well have been, is God not able to keep us in the land he brought us to? And the answer to the question is, yes, he is able. The reason you're not there is because you didn't live up to your end. This was the promise, that God would be with you, he would protect you and provide for you and bless you as you are his people. When you turn your back, he's free to leave this. And he does. And so this is a reminder to them as they read this again. And I think it's probably in the mind of Nehemiah here of going, we are where we are largely because of what we've chosen to do. Now, if that doesn't hit home, I don't know what does. We are where we are largely because of the choices that we have made. Okay? That's not fun. It's not a fun thing to think about because it's always nice if I had somebody else to blame. Right? Okay, I see some nods, but, right? If I can point the finger at somebody else, it's much better. But whenever it comes, when it finally hits home of going, no, I am where I am because this is what I've chosen to do, right? That makes it worse. But it does not leave them without hope because he says, I remember what you said. And it's funny to me that a lot of these guys that we read about in the Old Testament are not shy about reminding God of what he's promised. Right? You promised, right? You promised that if we decided to turn our back on you, that you would kick us out of the land, and you did. But you also promised that if we turned back to you, that you would bring us home. And God seems to be okay with that. Okay, I think that's something that we ought to remember is that God has made promises, and we can count on those promises, and He's good with that. And He also reminds him. This prayer is reminiscent of so many encounters with God, but toward the end of this, it reminds me of Moses. Remember, these are your people. Right? When God's getting ready to kill them after the golden calf episode, and there's the fight between God and Moses about who they belong to. Right? God says, your people have done this. Right? It's like parents. Right? You know what your son did today? Right? Right? Your people are down there doing this. And Moses says, here's what your people are doing. And God keeps saying, no, I don't want them. Right? And Moses goes, I don't want them either. So what are we going to do? But at the end, right, he goes, remember, these are your people that you redeemed and you brought out, and this is what people are going to think of you because of it. And Nehemiah does something similar to this. Remember, these are your people. And they want to be your people. I think it's pretty instructive. Even these old passages like this of our own interactions with God, our own prayer life, and it kind of follows that pattern. I hope, right, of remembering who it is that we're addressing, who it is that we're speaking to, the privilege that we have to do that, the fact that He doesn't really owe us, but that He's been gracious and He will continue to be, and that we live in response to that graciousness. Okay, that's chapter 1. I want to move on into chapter 2 because there's some interesting things here. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. And the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of the heart. Then I was very much afraid. All right. I didn't read that right. Now I had not been sad in his presence. That's what Nehemiah says. But the king picks up on this. And it seems odd just at first glance, but there are little things in here that I hadn't paid attention to before, but some other things I was reading along with this kind of brought them to attention. This has been months since he first got the news. He got the news in the winter, I think. That seems to be and this is now the spring. So it's been months since he got the news. And this idea of what's going on in Jerusalem and what his fellow Jews are suffering there has weighed on him enough that it's evident in how he looks now. I'm assuming, and doesn't really say. It does say, and the first one just doesn't give us any kind of length of time, but there's probably, again, it's just a guess on my part, considerable fasting going on with Nehemiah. But again, we know how that happens, right? How the things that are going on around us can affect the way that we look to other people. I mean, we know that. We see people, we walk past people, and we look at them and we go, "Are you okay?" Yeah. Now, you got to be careful, right? Because I've done that, and everything was fine. So it didn't work out real well. There was a lady I worked with years ago. I went and asked her. She came in one morning, and I said, "Are you feeling okay?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Oh, I was just wondering because you didn't look like you felt good." Right? And she said, "No, I'm fine." And so I thought, okay, well, I'll leave now, right? That's pretty much it. So we can get it wrong, but we do notice when there's something going on with somebody. And I do like the king here in this case that we think of, they're just mortal enemies of the Jews, and they're really not in this particular instance anyway. He actually seems to care about this guy that's bringing him his wine, which is probably a good thing because he does have his life in his hands in some cases, right? But to say, so what's wrong with you? You're not yourself, which gives an opportunity. I said to the king, "Let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" And the king said to me, "What are you requesting?" So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it." And the king said to me, the queen sitting beside him, "How long will you be gone, and when will you return?" To please the king to send me, when I had given him a time. And I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let letters be given to me to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may let me pass through until I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress, for the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy." The king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of my God was on me. The good hand of my God was on me is another one of those phrases that ties back to Ezra. That's mentioned in there too as he goes back, which is another one of those indications that these two go together, right? The good hand of my God was on me. All right, so let's what if for just a second. What if when the king asked Nehemiah, "What's wrong with you?" if he said, "Nothing, I'm fine"? Nothing. That's what happened. Right? There's no opportunity here. There's nothing. The king's not going to voluntarily do this. And the truth of the matter is he probably doesn't care. I mean, really. I mean, Jerusalem's not on the top of his list. All right. So if somebody asks us, is there something wrong? And if there is something wrong, and if we say no, what happens? Nothing. That's what happens, right? The person that's asked us asked because they care about us. Wouldn't you agree? Yes, no, maybe? Okay. All right. They care about us. Now, if we say no, everything's fine, we continue on with whatever's bothering us, and they have no opportunity to help in any way. And then when if things continue to go bad, we go, I don't know why somebody didn't help me. Because you didn't tell them, right? It's okay. I think it's maybe one of the most damaging things that we do, okay? And I don't, a long time ago I was going to do this, and I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to find one. I'm going to buy a little soapbox, and I'm going to stand on it once in a while. But, okay? But it may be one of the most damaging things that we can do when there is something that is bothering us to say, fine. Because it's not helping. Right? We ought to be able to be honest with one another. If there's something wrong, we ought to be able to say, this is it. Right? Now, we ought to, again, we don't want to just vomit all our problems on somebody else all the time. However, there are people that we know who they are. They genuinely love us. They genuinely care about us. And they say, is there something wrong? We go, yes, there is. And there may not be a thing that they can do about it. They may not be able to send us back to Jerusalem to rebuild the wall. But they can be with us through this situation and help. That make sense? One of the commentators that I was reading along with this talked about the way that Nehemiah talks about Jerusalem. The city of my father's graves. And there's probably a lot to this. One of the commentators that I was reading said that this was his way of identifying Jerusalem without saying the name out loud, because there'd already been some trouble, as we remember back in Ezra, about the letters being sent to the kings of going, if you let them rebuild Jerusalem, there's going to be a problem. And it's just a way of him saying, almost, well, I'd like to go back home without telling where home is. But then he turns around and says Judah, so I don't know how much water that holds. But it's just, it's one of those things. The other thing that we also would need to remember as we work through these books like this is, again, time. Just like it's months before Nehemiah actually gets asked about this by the king, it's years before he gets back. As soon as chapter 3 starts, he's back in Jerusalem, but it's years. The Anchor Bible Commentary Series guesses at about 5 years from the time that the king says yes until he actually goes. Because there are things that have to be gathered. They talk about the timber that they're going to get. They talk about the guards that go with them, all the preparations that go into this. And it's not a short trip, 900 miles or so. So it's going to take a while to get there to start with. And then they have the work to do. All right, so let's go on chapter 2, starting in verse 9. Then I came to the governors of the province beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. The king had sent with me officers of the army and horsemen. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite servant heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. So I went to Jerusalem. I was there 3 days. Then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me. I told no one what God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. There was no animal with me but the one on which I rode. I went out by night by the valley gate to the dragon spring and to the dung gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that were broken down and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. Then I went on to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal that was under me to pass. And I went up in the night by the valley and inspected the wall, and I turned back and entered the valley gate, and so returned. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, and I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest who were to do the work. There's a lot of things about various gates and areas here, and again, I believe it's the Anchor Bible bunch that says that we know more about the topography of Jerusalem because of what Nehemiah says than almost any of the others. Because as the walls begin to be rebuilt, he talks about where they are. And based on that, they've actually drawn a sketch of these were the walls that were built, how much there was of all that. It's interesting to me in a lot of ways that Nehemiah goes and does this by himself. There's a hint of a few going with him, but nobody knows what he's doing there. And that seems to be a question that would have been asked. When Nehemiah shows up with all of this stuff and with all these horsemen, with all the stuff from the king, of going, well, I wonder what he's doing here. And I don't know. I wish I knew. But he gives no reason why he doesn't tell him. And I don't know whether it's because he wants to make sure of what his brother has told him way back, however many years ago now, that this is the case, or exactly what they're getting into. But he tells no one until he makes this round, and then he comes back. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we're in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer derision. I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build. They strengthened their hands for the work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite servant, and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they jeered at us and despised us and said, what is this thing that you're doing? Are you rebelling against the king? Then I replied to them, the God of heaven will make us prosper, and we his servants will arise and build, but you have no portion or right or claim in Jerusalem. All right, so this is kind of setting the stage for the opposition that's coming. Everybody seems to be in when he tells them this. We're ready to go. We're ready to do this. They see the need and they're ready to get to work. We are going to skip. We're going to actually skip reading chapter 3. You can read that however you want to. This is when you want to. This is one of those descriptions of the walls and where everybody is and all of that. And it means very little to us. Okay, can we just be honest? To them, it's a big deal, and to us, it is maybe for reconstruction purposes of what they've done. But there's not much there. But I do want to skip on. I want to skip on to chapter 4 since we've got some time. When Sanballat heard we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. And he said in the presence of his brothers and of the army of Samaria, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish it up in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and burned ones at that? Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, yes, what they're building. If a fox goes up on the wall, he'll break down their stone wall. Hear our God, for we are despised. Turn back their taunt on their own heads and give them up to be plundered in a land where they're captives. Do not cover their guilt, and let not their sin be blotted out from your sight, for they have provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders. So we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. Okay. This is another one of those spots. And I don't know what we think about this, okay? So the wall's going, we have the opposition coming and trying to put a stop to it first by just belittling him, right? What do you think you're doing? Yeah. Oh, good work. Yeah. That'll never stand. Yeah. That idea of if a fox goes up on it, it'll fall down, all that stuff. But it's the prayer of Nehemiah. Hear, O our God, for we're despised. Turn back their taunt on their own heads and give them up to be plundered in a land where they are captives. That's a tough one, right? Don't blot out their sins, he says later. Don't cover their guilt. They've provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders. It seems a harsh one, right? There's several of those. Several of those in the Old Testament. Some of those in the Psalms. What they call the imprecatory Psalms of, dash their the children of the enemy's teeth on the rocks. I mean, that doesn't sound good, right? So I don't know what to make of it exactly. But what I would say is that what Nehemiah is calling for is for God to act on their behalf. Okay? Now, and Nehemiah, again, is not, doesn't back away, doesn't seem to be shy about what he would like. Okay? What I would like is for them to be taken captive in a place away from their land the way we were. What I'd like is for you to act against them the way you acted against us, with one exception, that they stay there and not come back. Okay? What he doesn't do is that he doesn't act against them himself or call for the builders to do it as well. There is a spot that's coming up. They're going to defend themselves where they'll be ready for defense, but they do not go on the offensive here. All right? Now, what does Nehemiah think if God doesn't do this like he's asked? And the answer to that question is, I have no idea. All right? But one of the things that I think that we get to see here, and one of the things that I hope that we get to see here, is that he is doing what we find later on talked about. Paul, I'm trying to remember exactly where it was. I didn't look this up. So it's one of the letters of Paul. Start in Romans and move forward. You'll find it somewhere. It's in there, okay? I think it's in Romans. Do not repay evil for evil. Okay? But leave room for God's vengeance. And this is what Nehemiah is doing. What Nehemiah wants is for God to get rid of him. Okay? I don't think there's much question about that. He's pretty specific. But what Nehemiah is not going to do is do it in God's place. And that's a good lesson. Okay? This is one of those spots, where our instinct is to push back. Right? Our instinct is to get that revenge that's due. Agreed? No, you don't agree because you're a lot better people than I am. That's our instinct, though. Now the problem is, right? The problem is, and we see this all the time, and we see it in various ways, and all you just got to do is just look around, is that we don't know when to stop. Right? The Old Testament law of eye for eye and tooth for tooth was that the punishment and the retribution is equal, but we don't do that. Okay, we don't do that well, right? We're wronged and then we wrong back, but then to make sure that they know how much we were wronged, we go just a little further, right? We go take it one step further, and then they do the same thing, and before you know, we're dashing our enemies' children's teeth against the rocks. I mean, that's where it leads, right? And so what Nehemiah is doing, and what I hope that we do, is we're going, okay, and we recognize this in ourselves. Okay? We understand that we've got that. And I think one of the things that Nehemiah helps us do here is to go, all right, God, this is what I want, but I'm going to leave it to you to do it. And you do it however you see fit. And if you don't see fit to send them somewhere, if you don't see fit for them to die horrible, painful deaths, then that's okay too. But I'm going to leave this to you. I'm not going to do it. And it's very confessional and very, it's a kind of a self-awareness thing of going, and I know this is in me. So I'm asking for you to not let me let it have its head. How's that? For me not to turn it loose. And to trust that you'll do the right thing with it. That's a tough one. There's a lot of things that we're called to do as the people of God, and this may be one of the toughest, and maybe not for everybody, and that's fine. I hope it's not for everybody. But we have that tendency, and I think we recognize that, and I think Jesus recognizes that, because that's that section in the Sermon on the Mount that we all hate. We don't say it out loud like that, but we do, right? You've heard that it was said, "Love your neighbor, hate your enemy." Now we're good if we stop right there, right? We're going, amen, right? There we go. Move on. But he doesn't let us sit there in that. Love your enemy. Love your enemy. And that's hard. And if we don't believe that, then we turn a few pages in our Bible and we come to a prophet named Jonah. And God says, go to your enemy. And he says, no thanks. Because this is what I want for them, is what Nehemiah wants for the people who are opposing the wall. What Jonah wants for Nineveh is for them to die, for God to wipe them out. And when he gets there and God doesn't, he gets mad. And he looks at God and he says, I knew you'd do this. I knew it. This is why I didn't want to come in the first place. Right? Jonah's not just there as a survival guide for somebody who gets swallowed by a whale. Right? Jonah's there to make us look at ourselves and go, hey, exactly how do I feel about God's grace? And am I okay with it? And Nehemiah goes, this is what I want. But then he leaves it in God's hands to go, you deal with it as you see fit. All right? Now this is going to break your heart, but I'm done. We're about 5 minutes early. So if you hurry, you can get the donuts before the kids get out of class. All right. Let's have a prayer real quick. Father, we love you. And we are so thankful to be your people. We're thankful to be here this morning. You are the creator and the sustainer, the one who keeps covenants and the one that loves and abounds in steadfast love. And we, like the people that we read of constantly, are those who have fallen short. But we're thankful for your mercy and your grace. We're thankful that we can be called your people, that we didn't earn it, we didn't deserve it. And our prayer, God, is that we live in response to that grace. What we want is to be your people and to represent you well. Help us to recognize the areas where we don't do that and to help us to correct it. We're thankful for your great love for us and that you have brought us here and you want to be with us. We're thankful for our time together this morning and for these words that you've left for us. And our prayer is that we use them to be closer to you and closer to one another. We love you so much. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.